You're not hosting a wedding in this neighborhood, Mr. Renix. Certainly not one where your daughter thinks she can break my rules. Marla Quain, president of our HOA board, snapped the moment her heels hit my lawn. She said it like my daughter's wedding was an act of rebellion, like joy itself required her permission. She didn't even look at the white tent swaying gently in the Briar Glen breeze, or the carved stone bench beneath the cherry tree, Celine's bench, Leora's altar. No, Marla marched straight toward me with a clipboard full of threats and a confidence that made my jaw clench. I didn't move. Then I hope you brought the real city seal this time, not another one of your photocopied fantasies. Her eyes twitched, just once, but it was enough. Subscribe now if you've ever watched someone in power overplay their hand, because this woman is about to learn exactly who she tried to intimidate. My name is Calder Renix, I said quietly, evenly, letting the words settle like dust before a storm. And starting next week, I'm the new chief of police for Caldridge County, which means this little order you handed me. It's a felony-level forgery. She blinked, and for 1 second, the smirk she wore like armor slipped. But I wasn't bluffing, not today. Not on my daughter's wedding day. I bought this home under a trust while transitioning from federal undercover operations. I hadn't told Briar Glen who I was. I wanted an easy, quiet year with my daughter before stepping fully into the chief's role. But Marla Quain wasn't interested in quiet. She was interested in control. For the past month, she'd slapped us with violations. Unauthorized gathering, unapproved outdoor lighting, non-compliant memorial installation. That last one was about the stone bench Leora and I carved for her mother, my wife, who died before she could see her walk down the aisle. That bench was the heart of today. It was the only place my daughter felt close to her. But Marla didn't care. She cared about symmetry, power, being obeyed. She thrust an envelope toward my chest. This is your final notice. As of this morning, you owe $7,800 and your community access is suspended. If you do not immediately shut down this illegal wedding, I will escalate this. Don't test me. Behind her stood Silas Greer, HOA treasurer and her reluctant shadow. His shoulders were rounded, his gaze pinned to the grass, fingers shaking as he clutched his tablet. Silas wasn't a bad man, just one trapped in the wrong family with the wrong woman in charge, and the way he avoided eye contact told me something important. He knew this was wrong. He also knew something he was scared to say. Marla, I said, stepping in front of the tent. You're trespassing. I have permits from the city. I have approvals from the fire marshal. Everything here is compliant. You made up rules that don't exist because you didn't like the idea of people gathering without your blessing. My blessing is necessary, she snapped. You think your position gives you special treatment? You're nobody here, just another homeowner under my jurisdiction. My jurisdiction, I repeated slowly, starts next week. Her brows lifted in mocking disbelief, but I wasn't done. This wedding isn't harming anyone. It's in my backyard, on my land, under the cherry tree my wife planted for our daughter before she died. That bench you tried to fine us for, it's the last thing my wife ever touched before she went into hospice. That did it. Even Silas looked up. Just briefly, enough to show guilt in his eyes. But Marla, she scoffed. Emotional stories don't exempt you from rules, Mr. Renix. Rules, that word again. I looked at the string lights hanging like quiet stars above the aisle. My daughter hung them last night, humming her mother's favorite song. She wanted her mom to be part of the light. That's what she said. Marla wanted them gone. She wanted everything gone. I took a long breath and met her stare. This wedding is happening. You're done interfering. And if you try stepping onto this property again, I'll treat it as criminal trespass. You arrogant man, she hissed. You really think you can stop me? I stared right back at her. I don't need to stop you, I said. Your own actions will. The tent billowed softly in the breeze, like it hadn't just been marked for destruction by the most dangerous kind of authority, the kind that masks itself in neighborhood regulations. I stayed planted near the cherry tree while Marla stormed off, high heels stabbing divots into the grass like punctuation marks. Her clipboard was still clenched in her hands like a badge of war. Leora watched her go from the kitchen window. She wasn't in her dress yet. Her hair was still pinned up in curlers, her sleeves rolled back as she arranged the last batch of hand-pressed place cards. Her jaw was tight, her eyes unreadable. She's really trying to ruin this, isn't she? She asked through the glass. She just did, I answered, but not in the way she thinks. I didn't want Leora worrying about Marla Quain on her wedding day, but I also knew my daughter too well. She'd inherited more than Celine's eyes. She'd inherited her fire, and Marla had just poured gasoline on it. An hour passed. Guests began to arrive, trickling through the side gate, dressed in spring pastels and soft shoes, careful not to step on the flower beds. They all looked uncertain, pausing to glance back down the road before walking in, like they expected someone to stop them, like they'd been warned, because they probably had. Briar Glen was a place where neighborly greetings came with caution, where smiles didn't always reach the eyes, and where Marla's word was taken more seriously than any posted regulation. She was the kind of person who sent formal complaints about lawn ornaments and called meetings over improperly angled trash bins. Over the years, people had learned it was easier to appease her than oppose her. But I hadn't spent 30 years chasing organized crime across state lines to be undone by a woman with a laminator. I stood under the cherry tree, adjusting the mic stand as the speakers were tested, while the caterers, who'd been warned twice by someone they couldn't identify, quietly asked if the event was still permitted. I reassured them, but I took notes: faces, license plates, timing. At 3:42 p.m., Silas returned. He came up the side gate alone, dressed in an ill-fitting blazer and sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like he was walking into a courtroom, not a ceremony. "Mr. Renix," he said quietly. "It's Calder. You're a guest today." He swallowed. "I need to give you a heads up. She's not done. She called in a private enforcement firm, said the board authorized it, but we didn't. There was no vote." I didn't answer. "She said you threatened her. She's filed a motion with the HOA's legal liaison to issue an emergency injunction." I took a slow breath. "Did she show you proof of that?" Silas shook his head. "No, just said she had city backing." "She doesn't." "I know, I checked. The city clerk hasn't filed anything in 2 weeks. I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner." I studied him for a moment. His hands shook even more now than they had that morning. But at least he was here. That mattered. "You have the authority to call an emergency board review, don't you?" He blinked. "What?" "You're the treasurer? If you believe she's acted unilaterally and without a board vote, you can trigger internal review. Even if it doesn't stop her, it establishes a procedural record. One we'll need later." He nodded slowly. "I can. I will. Just, please don't tell her I told you." "I won't," I said. "But she'll know soon enough." Silas turned to leave, then paused. "Why haven't you reported her already? You could have shut her down yesterday." I looked toward the house. Through the window, Leora had finally slipped into her dress. Ivory. Simple. Celine would have cried. Maybe I would too, if I wasn't still clenching my jaw against what was coming. "Because I needed her to go all the way," I said. "I needed her to show everyone exactly who she is. On the record." And then I heard the engine. Low, heavy, not a sedan, not a guest. I walked toward the curb and saw the black SUV pulling up. No markings, no plates. And Marla stepping out of the passenger seat, wearing something slung across her hip that didn't belong at a wedding. I didn't move, neither did she. Marla stood by the black SUV like she was posing for a political ad, chin lifted, clipboard tucked to her chest like a declaration of war. But my eyes weren't on her face. They were on the strap across her shoulder, tactical black, nylon, thick, slung diagonally, a shoulder holster. She didn't even try to hide it. The man who stepped out from the driver's side was younger, maybe mid-30s, beard trimmed too sharply, sunglasses that tried too hard to look invisible. He didn't speak, just stood near her, arms crossed, scanning the house and yard like he was casing the scene. His shirt bore no insignia, no nameplate, no badge, which meant he was no one. I walked toward the edge of the driveway, staying just inside the property line. I didn't cross into the street. That line mattered now. "You've lost your mind," I said without raising my voice. "No," she replied. "I've taken back control. You refused to comply. You escalated. Now I'm escalating. I have permits, witnesses. You're on the edge of criminal trespass." Marla smiled like I'd paid her a compliment. "You think the law is your shield here? You think people like you get to weaponize grief to ignore process?" The man beside her shifted slightly, his coat lifted enough for me to see the edge of a sidearm, real, not cheap. She'd hired private security, armed. "You brought a gun to my daughter's wedding," I said. "You brought one to my house. I brought protection, in case your crowd gets unruly. You've already threatened me. You lied about city support, you forged documents, you filed false claims. And unless you have it recorded," she said sweetly, "it never happened." From behind me, I heard the music start, a soft violin piece Leora picked herself, something Celine used to hum in the garden. Guests turned toward the aisle. The wedding had begun. Marla's eyes narrowed. "You're really going through with this?" "I am." "Then I'll do what I have to," she said, turning back toward the SUV. I stepped forward. "Don't." She stopped. "I'm going to say this clearly for the last time. If you set foot past this curb, I will treat it as armed trespass. I have video surveillance running on all four corners. Your presence has already been documented. And who's going to stop me?" she asked. "You're just another father in a suit." "My badge number is sealed until Monday morning," I said, "but I still have the authority to enforce criminal codes. You step onto my land with a weapon, and I'll call in the entire Caldridge Tactical Unit. And they will not treat you as HOA president, they will treat you as an armed suspect." Her face changed, not fully, but enough. A flicker of calculation, not fear, something colder, deeper. She wanted me to back down, and I wasn't going to. She turned and walked away, but not toward the car, toward the sidewalk. And I realized what she meant to do. She wasn't going to stop the wedding, she was going to disrupt it from within. By walking the sidewalk, still public property, pretending to monitor noise levels or crowd flow. She wouldn't need to step onto my lawn. All she needed was a trigger, one she could claim was someone else's fault. I turned back toward the tent. Leora had just stepped outside, hand gently placed in her uncle's as he prepared to walk her halfway down the aisle before passing her to me. Her eyes sparkled in the late afternoon sun, hair pinned in a delicate crown of flowers. Celine would have wept. I almost did. The violin faded. The guests stood. And as I walked forward, suit pressed, steps steady, eyes on my daughter, I saw Marla move. She wasn't even subtle. Her coat lifted. Her hand reached under. I didn't have time to yell. A pop, not loud, but sharp. One crack against the soft hush of music and wind. Leora stumbled. Screams, shouts. Someone ducked. And my daughter fell into her uncle's arms, blood blooming through her dress like a cruel second veil. For a moment, the world didn't move. The violin bow froze midair. A glass slipped from someone's hand and hit the grass without a sound. My lungs locked, refusing to take in air. All I could see was the impossible sight of Leora, my daughter, crumpling in her uncle's arms, white dress staining red in a slow, brutal bloom. Then everything snapped back at once. People screamed, chairs toppled, someone yelled for an ambulance. Her uncle tried to lower her gently to the ground, hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped her. I ran, no hesitation, no thought, just pure reflex, the same instinct that had carried me through ambushes and raids and dark rooms filled with men who didn't want to be found. But this wasn't a suspect. This wasn't a stranger. This was my little girl. "Leora, stay with me. Look at me." My voice wasn't steady. I didn't care. I pressed both hands over the bloody tear in her shoulder, feeling the wet warmth spread beneath my fingers. She blinked slowly, lips parting in a small gasp. "Dad?" Her voice trembled. "I'm here." I leaned in close. "I'm right here. You're okay. You're okay." Behind me, chaos tore through the backyard. Guests ducked behind chairs. Someone shouted that more shots might be coming. Someone else screamed Marla's name with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. A groomsman kicked over the dessert table trying to get to cover. But I only had one focus. I tore the silk sash from the nearest chair and cinched it around her shoulder, forcing the bleeding to slow. Her fiancé slid to his knees beside me, face pale, breath ragged. He tried to take her hand, but stopped when he saw my expression, something between fury and control, something I hadn't worn since the night a case went sideways in Detroit, and I had to make a decision that still kept me awake sometimes. "Call EMS," I barked. "Now! Tell them we have a GSW, stable but bleeding, female, early 20s, conscious." A voice answered, "Already on the phone," and I didn't even look to see who it was. I looked up instead, straight toward the sidewalk, straight toward Marla Quain. She stood stiff and rigid, one hand still inside her coat, face twisted into something monstrous. Not fear, not horror, indignation, as if she had been wronged. The private guard beside her looked stunned, wide-eyed, jaw slack. He hadn't known she was going to fire. He took a single half-step backward, hands raised slightly like he suddenly understood exactly where this was headed. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. Blood smeared across my hands, dripping down my cuffs. I didn't wipe them. I didn't speak. I just walked toward the curb, each step measured, my gaze locked on her like a scope. She saw me coming and straightened her spine as if preparing for applause. "He lunged at me!" she yelled to no one in particular. "He lunged! I had to defend myself. He was aggressive." There was no he, no lunge, no threat. We all saw what she aimed at, and she knew it. Still, she clung to the lie like it would save her. My feet hit the curb. I stopped 3 feet from her, blood drying on my knuckles, heartbeat steadying into something cold and controlled. The guard lifted his hands higher now, palms out. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he stammered. "She said there was a threat. She said—" "Shut up!" Marla snapped without looking at him. Several neighbors had crept outside their doors, drawn by the screaming. I saw Delma Vori from across the cul-de-sac, hands covering her mouth. I saw 2 joggers staring, frozen. And I saw Silas, poor, trembling Silas, standing near the mailbox with his tablet clutched to his chest like a shield. His face was gray. He knew. "Calder?" he whispered, voice barely audible. I didn't look at him. My eyes stayed locked on Marla. "You fired at my daughter," I said quietly. "It was self-defense," she said instantly. "She moved toward me. She startled me. Your whole setup wasn't sanctioned. There were too many people. I felt threatened. You all heard her scream. She screamed because you shot her." "I did no such thing," she insisted, voice rising in pitch. "Your daughter is exaggerating. Your crowd is hysterical." I raised one blood-soaked hand and pointed directly at the camera mounted on the lamppost across the street. The lamppost she herself had demanded be installed. The lamppost with full audio and video HOA access. The lamppost that recorded every second of what she had just done. Her face drained of color. The guard took 2 more steps back. Silas whispered, "Oh God." And for the first time, in the chaos and the noise and the pain, Marla Quain realized she wasn't the most powerful person in Briar Glen Estates. Not anymore. The wail of distant sirens rolled across Briar Glen in a low, rising hum, still minutes away, but close enough to signal that whatever illusion of control Marla believed she had was evaporating second by second. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, one hand still hovering near the holster, as if she couldn't decide whether to hide it or justify it. A gust of wind lifted the edge of her coat, revealing the weapon fully this time. Gasps rippled across the cul-de-sac. Neighbors stepped back. Some ducked behind porch rails. Others peered from behind curtains. A few clutched their phones with trembling hands. My voice stayed level, cold as polished steel. "Move your hand away from the holster." "I'm not under arrest," she snapped, her voice cracked. Not from fear, but outrage. "This is an HOA issue. This is a civil dispute. You people are hysterical." "Hysterical?" Delma Vori's voice cut through the air. She'd stepped out from behind her rose bushes, hands trembling, eyes glassy with fury. "You shot a girl. You shot that sweet girl." Her voice faltered. "Marla, what have you done?" Marla swung her head toward her. "I acted in defense of our covenant. This neighborhood has rules, Delma. Standards. That girl violated—" "That girl," Delma said, stepping closer, "is 23 years old, getting married today, and you took aim at her like she was an intruder. What rules are worth that?" Silas stood a few feet away, shoulders caved inward like he was trying to fold himself into nothing. His tablet shook in his hands, and I could see the screen. A paused HOA board meeting from the week before. The audio transcript highlighted, "Private enforcement approval, Marla only. Unauthorized, unvoted, illicit." He stared at it like the words were burning holes through the glass. "Silas," I said, not looking away from Marla, "you understand what comes next." His voice quivered. I didn't know she would do this. I knew she was escalating, but I thought it was fines, not... His gaze flicked toward the blood-stained patch of grass where paramedics would soon kneel. Not that. You knew enough, I said, and now you're going to tell the truth. Marla whirled on him. Silas Greer, do not speak. You are the treasurer. You answer to the board president. You answer to me. You will not... I stepped between them, and in that moment, something shifted. She finally understood. Not from my badge, not from the law, not from the neighbors now gathering in clusters like witnesses to a crime scene. No, she understood from the way I looked at her, the way a man looks when someone has hurt his child. She took half a step back. You're acting like a madman, she said. Your daughter? She must have startled me. I heard shouting. She moved quickly. You know how these things can be misinterpreted? There is no misinterpretation, I said. There's a camera on the lamppost, one on my porch, 2 on the corners of the tent, and 6 guests recorded the entire thing. You aimed, you fired, no one touched you, no one threatened you. Her lips twitched violently like she was fighting the urge to scream. You don't know what this neighborhood needs, she spat. You don't know the dangers I deal with, the complaints, the noise, the threats. You think I wanted to do this? You think I enjoyed being pushed to defend myself? She stepped forward. She raised her hand. She was holding her dress out of the mud, I said. That was the hand motion. For a moment, the wind fell silent. Her expression cracked, just slightly. A hairline fracture of something unspoken. Guilt? Recognition? No, not guilt. Something far more self-preserving. Fear of consequence. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the neighborhood. Red and blue lights flickered between the roofs as emergency vehicles approached the gated entrance. The private guard, still standing a few feet behind her, lifted both hands higher. I'm done, he said, voice shaking. I didn't fire. I didn't authorize anything. I didn't even know she had a gun on her. I'm stepping back. He placed his weapon on the sidewalk, kicked it toward me, and backed away with his palms up. I'm not part of this. I want it on record. It would be. Everything would be. Marla stared at him like he'd betrayed her, but her voice had lost its strength. Get back here, she demanded, but it came out thin. Cracked. You're hired to protect me. You need protection from yourself, he muttered, retreating. The first patrol car slid onto Briar Glen's main road. The gates, usually so proud and pristine, were now wide open, as if the whole community was holding its breath. I heard footsteps behind me. Leora's fiancé, running back from the paramedics who had just arrived. His voice strained as he called out, She's stable, for now. My hands curled into fists. Marla's face blanched at the words. For the first time, she looked unsure, as if the reality she'd been denying finally pierced through whatever fantasy she'd been living in. She opened her mouth to speak, but there was nothing left she could say. The first paramedic unit sprinted past me toward the backyard, medical bags slamming against their thighs as they followed the trail of guests pointing toward where Leora lay. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Not yet. If I saw her again before securing the scene, I wasn't sure I could stay steady. And steady was exactly what this moment demanded. 2 patrol cars stopped at the curb. Doors burst open. Officers I'd trained, mentored, or served alongside stepped out in rapid sequence. Their eyes flicked from me, to my bloody cuffs, to Marla, to the weapon on the pavement. Chief Renix, Officer Danton called, disbelief in his voice. What happened? The formal title struck like a spark. Whispers rippled through the gathering neighbors. A name they'd heard on county news, but never connected to the quiet man who lived on Hawthorne Lane. I didn't correct it. I pointed at Marla. Active, shooter on scene, 1 civilian down, my daughter. Weapon discharged once, suspect armed, holstered, private guard neutralized and disarmed, witnesses everywhere. Cameras on the lamppost and house show the full sequence. Move. Danton didn't hesitate. He motioned to 2 officers. Secure her, now. No! Marla shrieked, stumbling backward as they approached. No, you can't arrest me. You have no authority here. This is an HOA matter. I was enforcing... You discharged a firearm in public, Danton snapped. You aimed at an unarmed civilian. Step away from the holster and place your hands where I can see them. It was self-defense, she howled. He lunged. She lunged. Someone lunged. There was movement and "You're done," I said quietly. Her eyes darted to me. For the first time since she'd strutted onto my lawn earlier that morning, the smugness was gone. What replaced it wasn't remorse or horror. It was something more primal, self-preservation. "You won't get away with this," she said, voice trembling. You can't ruin me. I run this community. I have pull. I have contacts. You think anyone will believe you over me? I've documented everything. I've recorded everything. I've filed reports." Her voice climbed into a wild pitch. "People listen to me. They always have." "People listened," I said, "because they were afraid of you. That ends today." Danton gave her one final command. "Hands up." When she didn't comply, the officers moved. They grabbed her arms, twisting them gently but decisively behind her back. She kicked once, a weak, desperate attempt at resistance, before her knees buckled in the wet grass. As the cuffs clicked into place, a long, fractured wail tore from her throat. "This is illegal! You can't do this! I'm the president! I'm the president!" Silas Greer stepped forward, shaking from head to toe. "Not anymore," he whispered, then louder. I resign, effective immediately, and I'll cooperate fully. I'll testify. I'll show every record, every unauthorized payment, every meeting she falsified. She's been using HOA funds. She's been lying to all of us. His voice broke. "I'm so sorry." Marla whirled her head toward him, eyes blazing. "You traitor. I gave you everything. I protected you. You pathetic—" "Enough," I said. Her mouth snapped shut with the force of a slammed door. The officers lifted her to her feet. Her hair, once perfectly arranged, stuck to her forehead. Her coat hung crooked. Her authority, her shield, was gone. The crowd watched in a heavy silence broken only by murmurs and stifled sobs. A few guests from the wedding clung to each other, still shaken. Children peeked from behind their parents. Neighbors whispered names, half-remembered regulations, and the words "shot" and "wedding" again and again. And then, cutting through the noise, "Calder!" a voice shouted from behind me. I turned. Leora's fiancé was running toward me, chest heaving, face streaked with tears and adrenaline. "They're stabilizing her," he said breathlessly. "The paramedics got pressure on the wound. They're loading her now. She needs the hospital, but she's conscious. She's asking for you." The air left my lungs in a single, brutal rush. I walked toward the stretcher. The crowd parted like a shifting tide, giving me a clear path to the backyard. The cherry tree came back into view, branches swaying with delicate blossoms that had been moments away from witnessing vows, now forced to witness violence instead. Paramedics lifted the stretcher over a strip of gravel. I saw her profile, pale, trembling, but alive. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard my steps. "Dad," she whispered, voice weak. I reached for her hand, careful not to disturb the bandage pressing against the wound. "I'm right here. Is she gone?" Her fingers curled around mine, desperate. "Please tell me she's gone." "She's in custody," I said. "She won't touch another soul." Leora nodded faintly. Tears slipped down her temples. I didn't see her. I was just walking. You didn't do anything," I said. "Nothing. She did this. She alone." The paramedics signaled they needed to move. I held her hand one more second, just one, before stepping back and letting them take her to the ambulance. As the stretcher rolled away, I turned toward the cul-de-sac. Neighbors stood motionless. Officers waited for orders. Camera lights blinked on every corner of my house, quietly recording everything for the case that would come. And at the center of it all, handcuffed and shaking, Marla Quain stared at me with a hatred so sharp it trembled at the edges. She'd wanted control. Instead, she'd ignited a war she could never win. The ambulance pulled away from Briar Glen with its sirens muted, transport protocol for stabilized patients, but my ears still rang from the phantom echo of what had happened. Leora was on her way to County General. I should have been with her. Every cell in my body wanted to follow, but I couldn't. Not yet. Danton approached as the second cruiser pulled in behind the first, blocking the cul-de-sac. "She's booked," he said, nodding toward Marla, now secured in the back seat of his patrol car. "Weapon recovered. No serial tampering. Permit expired. She had no legal authority to carry, let alone discharge." "She'll lie," I said flatly. "She already has." She can try, he said, holding up a small evidence bag. But the bullet pulled from the tent frame matches the casing found on the sidewalk. And your daughter's dress? That'll have trace powder embedded. We'll match it. I nodded. But I wasn't thinking about ballistics. I was watching the neighbors. They weren't whispering anymore. They were organizing. A quiet current had begun to ripple across the lawn. Delma had already started moving between small groups, speaking low and fast. I saw the retired dentist from the cul-de-sac, over Barlow, nodding at her words. Someone else was collecting phone videos. They were witnesses now, no longer residents under Marla's rule. One of the guests, an older man in a gray vest, approached me carefully. "I served with your wife," he said. "Celine, I was in her trauma unit back in Kandahar. She talked about you and Leora like you were her entire universe." I stared at him. "You knew Celine?" "She patched me up after an IED. She was the calmest person I've ever met. She talked about that tree you two were planting. Said it would bloom stronger every year, just like your daughter would." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry I had to see it end like this, but I'm glad I was here. She'd have wanted me to tell you. Leora's going to get through this. She's her mother's daughter." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just shook his hand and nodded. He walked back toward the others. Behind me, Silas stood near the shattered remains of the dessert table. His shirt was damp with sweat, his collar wilted. But he wasn't hiding anymore. He held his tablet like it was a sword he'd finally decided to unsheathe. "I downloaded all of it," he said. "Every vote she logged without approval, every unauthorized fund transfer, even the receipts, private security, signage printing, courier services billed to legal escalation strategy. She spent over 14 grand from the HOA reserve account in the last 6 weeks." I looked him dead in the eyes. "You willing to testify to all of it?" He nodded. "Yes, and I'll be submitting the records to the HOA's oversight committee, and the city council, and the homeowners themselves. I've already sent backups to 3 attorneys. I studied him. The man who once trembled behind Marla's orders now stood taller, shoulders straight, voice steady. "You're going to be the one to rebuild this place," I said. "Not me." His eyes widened. "But I'm not staying in this house, Silas. Not after today. I'll visit. I'll help. But this community deserves a leader who was never interested in control. You." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. Delma stepped forward then, holding a folded piece of paper. "We're holding an emergency HOA session tomorrow evening," she said. "Open forum, no board restrictions. We're voting to suspend the entire board and appoint interim leadership until a full audit is completed. Marla used fear. It's time we use our voices." She handed me the paper. I unfolded it. At the top, "Petition to revoke HOA governance powers pending criminal review." 73 signatures, out of 80 households. The community had spoken. I looked back at the tent, where petals still drifted, from the cherry tree like falling prayers. Leora should have had her vows here today. Instead, she had a bullet and a scar. But she was alive, and Marla was gone. I walked up the porch steps, blood now dried to a deep rust on my sleeves, and for the first time since this began, I let myself sit on the carved bench beneath the cherry blossoms. The wind moved through the branches, shaking loose a single petal that landed in my palm. Celine had called it a tree of second chances. Maybe now, finally, it could be one. The hospital room was too white, too still. Monitors beeped in calm rhythm, but I couldn't stop staring at the jagged line of blood on the edge of the IV tape. Just a small smear, dried now, almost nothing. But it told the story of how close everything had come to ending, how a ceremony meant for union had almost become a funeral. Leora stirred beneath the thin blanket. Her shoulder was heavily bandaged, her skin pale against the crisp fabric. The nurse had told me the bullet passed through soft tissue. No arteries, no bone. A miracle. Her eyes opened slowly, still foggy from medication, but present. "You stayed?" she whispered. "I always do," I said, my voice low. She blinked hard, and tears spilled sideways onto the pillow. "I didn't see her," she said. "I just heard your voice. Then the sound. Then everything tilted and my knees gave out." "You don't have to explain it," I said. "It's over." "No, it's not," she breathed. "You should have let me postpone it, the wedding. You knew she was going to do something." "I did," I admitted, "but I also knew it needed to happen. Because people like Marla only understand consequence when it ruins their script. She looked over at me. What happens to her now? I exhaled slowly. She's in custody. The DA will file charges by morning. At minimum, reckless endangerment with a firearm, aggravated assault, discharge of a weapon in a residential zone, and misuse of HOA funds. Civil suits will follow. She'll never hold a board seat again. Leora closed her eyes. She looked at me like I was the one threatening her. Her lip trembled. I was smiling, I remember that. Right before. I was smiling because I saw you waiting under the tree. I reached out and took her hand. I saw you smiling too. She squeezed my fingers gently. A quiet knock on the door made us both look up. The nurse peeked in, then stepped aside for someone behind her. Silas Greer. He held a clipboard in one hand and a small bouquet in the other. Garden roses from Briar Glen, clipped and arranged with surprising care. I can come back, he said softly. No, Leora said, her voice stronger. Come in. He stepped forward, looking painfully out of place in his oversized cardigan and second-hand shoes. He set the flowers on the table, then held out the clipboard to me. This is everything, he said. Itemized spending records, digital, votes, altered bylaws, the invoice from the security firm, and the forged cease and desist order she used. All time-stamped, all signed by Marla. I flipped through the first few pages. The evidence was airtight. Why bring this here? I asked. Because I was the one who let it get this far, he said, and I needed to deliver it in person. Leora watched him carefully. You knew she was cracking, didn't you? I knew she was obsessed, controlling. I didn't know she'd bring a weapon to a wedding, he said, shame thick in his voice. But I should have known where it was heading. I saw the signs. I saw her rage building. I said nothing. Now you've said enough, I said. He looked at me. The neighborhood's changing. We've started the audit. The oversight committee is demanding full transparency. We're passing new rules, term limits, rotation clauses, open elections. We'll never let anyone consolidate power like that again. I gave him a slow nod. Leora looked between us. Do they still want to finish the wedding? Silas blinked. What? The community, the guests, everyone who came. Silas swallowed. They're waiting. Her voice didn't waver. Then I want to walk down the aisle. When I'm strong enough. I want to wear this scar like armor. And I want the bench to still be there. You'll have it, I said. She smiled, faint but real. Later that night, I stood beneath the cherry tree alone. The petals still clung to the branches like they were waiting for the moment to resume. The blood had been washed from the grass, but I could still feel it there, beneath the soil, part of the memory now. A wedding interrupted, a tyrant exposed, a community waking up. And in the silence of that night, I made a quiet vow to Selene, not just justice, not just recovery, but rebirth. The following Saturday, the gates of Briar Glen stood open. Not broken, not breached, just open. Like a breath finally released after too long held. There was no guard posted at the entrance, no clipboard check, no patrol loop. The neighborhood had decided, almost unanimously, to suspend all enforcement activity until a new board could be elected. And in the center of the cul-de-sac, right beneath the cherry tree that had once watched over blood instead of vows, chairs were being arranged again. Leora wasn't in white this time, not yet. She stood by the porch in a soft rose gown, with a sling over her shoulder, her hair braided back with strands of baby's breath. Her fiancé adjusted the folds of her dress while Delma straightened the tablecloths. I told you they'd all come, I said from behind her. She turned, smiling through the tension still hidden in her eyes. I didn't think it would feel this quiet. It's not quiet, I said. It's peace. The difference mattered. Neighbors had volunteered everything. Tables, food, sound equipment, flowers. Some who had once shrunk under Marla's gaze now walked the lawns with ease, greeting one another like new acquaintances. Children played near the hedges. Old men clinked glasses, and no one looked over their shoulder. Silas moved between rows with a clipboard, not to issue warnings, but to confirm seating. He stopped briefly in front of me. I submitted everything to the city, he said. The HOA charter is under full review. We'll have open elections in 30 days. In the meantime, I've been named interim chair, temporarily. Good, I said. You'll do it right. I hope so. He hesitated. There's one more thing. He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket and handed it to me. It was a notarized document. Petition to rename Briar Glen Community Park. Proposed name, Celine's Garden. I stared at it, throat tight. Silas continued. We took a vote. Unanimous. I couldn't speak for a moment. When I finally managed it, the words were faint. She'd hate the attention. She saved this neighborhood, he said, even in death. Across the yard, Delma clapped her hands. All right, everyone, let's take our seats. Leora took my arm. You ready? She whispered. More than ever, I said. The music started, not a violin this time, just a speaker playing her favorite melody, one I remembered from her childhood, when Celine used to hum it while brushing her hair after bath time. It was a song about rain and sunlight, about things that grow through both. We stepped forward together. Guests stood. Not one phone came out. No flashes, no filters, just faces, open and present. We walked down the aisle lined with petals, not from a florist, but gathered that morning by neighbors who brought them from their own trees. And there, waiting under the cherry blossoms, her fiancé stood in a simple suit, hands trembling with joy. When I passed her hand to him, Leora turned back briefly, looking at the tree. Her free hand brushed the stone bench. It had been cleaned and sanded smooth, the carving clear again. Let joy take root where loss once bloomed. The officiant didn't speak from a podium. She stood on the grass like everyone else, reading from a notebook, weathered by rain and use. I've been asked, she began, to say nothing traditional, no sermons, no scriptures, just this. When hate tries to claim space, love must expand. Leora's vows were short. I was afraid, she said, her voice steady, but fear doesn't get to write our story. And then she placed her left hand over the scar peeking from her collarbone. This is proof I still can. They kissed under the blossoms as the wind moved gently through the branches. There was no applause, just quiet, reverent, like a page finally turned. Later, when the sun began to dip and the guests had filtered away, I sat alone on the bench. It no longer felt like a memorial. It felt like a promise, and I was ready to keep it. Marla, Quain's trial began 42 days after the wedding. The courtroom was small, tucked into the municipal complex downtown. No national headlines, no cameras, just a local judge, a seated jury, and the hum of whispered reckoning. She arrived in a navy suit, not her usual polished gray, but nothing could conceal the collapse beneath the fabric. Her once pristine hair hung limp. Her hands twitched constantly. The confidence she wore like armor back in Briar Glen had shattered into something jagged and thin. She didn't look at me when I entered. She didn't look at anyone. The prosecution had what it needed. Video from 3 angles, over a dozen eyewitness accounts, a medical report from the trauma surgeon, and Silas's full documentation of board misuse and false filings. But what they didn't have was her remorse. Not once during opening arguments did Marla acknowledge what happened. Her lawyer spun narratives about perceived threat, about panic under pressure, about overreach that went too far, but began with good intentions. Intentions don't matter when the bullet lands. I took the stand on the second day. The clerk asked me to state my name and role. Calder Renix, Chief of Police, Caldridge County. A small shift moved through the jury box. 1 or 2 eyebrows lifted. I described the day in calm detail. How she arrived, how she carried herself, how the tent flapped in the wind moments before she drew her weapon. I recounted Leora's fall. I recounted the blood. But it wasn't until the prosecutor asked, "Did the defendant issue any warning before firing?" that I finally turned to face Marla. She didn't speak to Leora. She didn't address the crowd. She didn't shout for distance. She didn't raise her hands or ask anyone to stop. I paused. She waited until Leora was smiling and walking toward me. Then she fired. Marla's expression didn't change. Not a blink, not a frown. Just that same hollow stare, like she couldn't believe this was happening to her. When Leora testified, it was the first time I saw the courtroom breathe. She wore a long-sleeve blouse, the bandage long gone, the scar carefully covered with makeup. But her voice, clear, calm, unshaken, cut deeper than any wound ever had. "I was holding my dress to keep it from dragging," she said. That's the movement she says looked threatening. I was smiling. I saw my dad waiting. I remember thinking, this was the happiest I'd been since my mom died. A juror wiped her eye. The judge cleared her throat, visibly moved. The defense didn't ask a single question. By the end of the week, it was over. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing would follow in a month, but the judge remanded Marla into custody immediately, citing her refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing, her financial manipulation of a governing board, and the fact that she still, even under oath, called Leora's wedding a civil disturbance. As they led her from the courtroom in cuffs, she glanced toward me for the first time in weeks. Not hatred, not fury, just disbelief. As if somewhere inside, she still believed the rules she wrote were the ones the world should follow. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Not national, but local outlets, neighborhood papers. A young journalist from the Caldridge Sentinel asked if I had a comment. I said, "The people of Briar Glen upheld the law. They refused fear. This wasn't a police victory. It was a community one." And that was all. We didn't celebrate. We went home. That night, I stood in the backyard where the bench sat beneath the tree, now surrounded by sprouting wildflowers. Leora had begun planting again. She told me it helped. Something to grow alongside the pain. The petals were long gone, but the leaves had come in full, casting shadows that danced across the stone. I looked up at the sky. The stars were out, quiet and steady. Behind me, the porch light clicked on. And Leora stepped out, barefoot, carrying 2 mugs. "Tea?" she asked. I nodded, taking one. We sat in silence, the kind that didn't demand words. Justice had been served, but healing. Healing was still unfolding, one moment at a time. A month later, the sentence came down. 7 years, state facility, with eligibility for parole after 5. Court-mandated psychological evaluation. Permanent disqualification from holding any position of governance in a residential community. Fines totaling over $130,000 in restitution for misuse of HOA funds and legal fees. Marla Quain didn't flinch when the judge read the sentence. She stood still, chin slightly raised, as if expecting someone, anyone, to object on her behalf. No one did. Not Silas, not the remaining board members. Not even the 2 neighbors who once attended every HOA meeting like it was sacred ritual. When it was over, she was led away without speaking a word. Her lawyer didn't shake hands. Her name disappeared from Briar Glen's website within hours. The neighborhood didn't throw a party. They hosted a cleanup. It started with Delma, as most things did these days. She went door to door with a clipboard, not for citations or complaints, but for volunteers. They dismantled the old HOA office at the community center and converted it into a public reading room. They replaced the iron notice board near the entrance with a shared chalkboard for announcements. And they painted over the faded HOA insignia on the clubhouse wall. In its place, a mural bloomed, petals of soft pink and cream and gold, wrapped around a stone bench at its center. A replica of the one under our tree. Celine's bench, they called it. I never asked them to. One evening I returned from the station to find Leora sitting beneath the cherry tree with her laptop balanced on her knees. She looked up and smiled. "I finished the form." I raised an eyebrow. "Form?" She turned. The screen toward me. It was a wedding license, signed, dated, notarized. "I know we had the vows," she said, "but technically we never filed it. I wanted to do that part in private, with you." I sat beside her, still in uniform. "And your husband?" "He thinks it's perfect. Said this way, we get to make it official on our terms." She hit submit, and just like that, it was done. Not loud, not ceremonial, just true. Later that night, we walked the garden path together, hands in our coat pockets, the breeze soft around us. The tree branches swayed overhead, not yet in bloom again, but alive with new buds, early promises of the spring to come. "I want to start a community trust," she said suddenly. "Not just for Briar Glen, for other neighborhoods dealing with toxic boards. A fund for legal aid, maybe workshops, resources." "You're serious," I said. She nodded. Marla showed me how bad it can get, and how hard it is to push back when no one knows their rights. "I've been talking to Silas. He wants to help. He'd be a good partner." She hesitated. "Think people will listen to me?" "They already are." We stopped near the bench, where a new plaque had been added. I hadn't seen it before. Leora brushed her fingers over it. "Built in memory, rebuilt in defiance." shared in peace. She looked at me. Did you write that? No, I said. Silas did. A long silence settled between us. I thought healing would feel bigger, she murmured. Like a moment, a finish line. It's not, I said. It's just a bench and a tree and a name no one speaks anymore. And tea, she added, nudging my elbow. There's always tea. We turned back toward the house. The lights in the windows glowed warm. Somewhere, faint music played, soft jazz on a low volume, drifting through the screen door. The air smelled like cut grass and lemon balm, and from somewhere across the street, a wind chime sang to no one in particular. Briar Glen was quiet, not silent, just whole. And this time, it wasn't because someone enforced it. It was because people had chosen it. Together. Spring came early that year. The cherry blossoms opened before the last frost had even faded, painting the neighborhood in pale pink. Every morning, petals drifted across the lawn, covering the cracks in the walkway like nature's own apology. It was the kind of peace you didn't trust at first, because it had been too long since the last one. But over time, it stayed. Leora's trust fund gained momentum. She named it the Celine Initiative in honor of her mother, the medic who believed every wound deserved a second chance to heal. Silas became its accountant, Delma its coordinator. Donations came from all over the county. People from other communities wrote letters, stories about HOA boards gone wrong, about families pushed to breaking points. And in each reply, Leora wrote back personally, not with pity, with Ewing strategy. She said her scar had become her signature, and, in a way, it had. The news cycle forgot about Marla Quain after her sentencing. Her name turned into a cautionary whisper, the president who shot the bride. But Briar Glen didn't forget. They didn't erase her to feel better. They remembered her so they'd never let it happen again. The new board was voted in mid-April. Silas refused the presidency, nominating Delma instead. She already runs this place, he'd said during the meeting, and everyone laughed because it was true. Under her leadership, the HOA transformed from a hierarchy into what she called a civic garden, every house responsible for one shared project each quarter. Maintenance, outreach, restoration. The neighborhood that once feared gatherings now hosted them weekly. And that bench under the cherry tree became a quiet landmark. Kids climbed on it. Elderly couples sat and read there in the evenings. Tourists took pictures when the blossoms fell, unaware of what the stone meant to the people who lived here. One afternoon, I found a small note tucked beneath the bench. The handwriting was careful, almost childlike. "Thank you for protecting us, Chief Renix. My mom says we can play outside again." I read it twice before folding it carefully into my pocket. That night, as dusk settled over Briar Glen, I brewed 2 cups of tea. One for me, one for the empty space beside me. Habit, maybe, or ritual. Celine would have liked the quiet hum of crickets, the distant laughter from across the cul-de-sac, the sound of Leora's voice drifting through the window as she spoke on the phone, advising another young couple on how to file for legal review against a corrupt HOA. She didn't just survive the chaos, she turned it into instruction. She'd inherited her mother's calm, but she'd built her own fire. When the porch light clicked on, I rose and walked the length of the yard. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked petals. The tree above me swayed gently, shedding a few more blossoms that caught in my hair. It wasn't about winning anymore. It never really had been. It was about restoring balance, making sure the people who thought power meant immunity learned that law, when wielded justly, protects everyone. Or it protects no one. I sat on the bench. The plaque gleamed faintly under the moonlight, built in memory, rebuilt in defiance, shared in peace. A simple sentence, but it held an entire year of war inside it. For a long time, I just listened. To the hum of life returning, to the breeze that carried voices instead of orders, to the whisper of a community learning how to breathe again. Leora came outside a few minutes later, barefoot, holding a lantern. She didn't say anything. She just placed it on the bench beside me and watched the flame dance against the stone. "She'd like what you did," she murmured. I nodded. "She'd like what you did." We sat together until the lantern burned low, until the petals stopped falling, until the night itself seemed to settle into the same rhythm as our hearts. When she finally stood to go inside, she looked back once and smiled. "Good night, Dad. Good night, sweetheart." And as the door closed behind her, I realized something quiet, something whole. Peace doesn't come from absence of noise. It comes when the right voices finally get heard. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?